presidency of the Syrian Arab Republic extends thanks to Syrians abroad for their wide participation in the elections. Russia and Iran will send representatives to monitor Syrian presidential elections. Syrian Arab army units control the villages of At-Tuf and Satah Zahnan in Dar'a countryside.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Irado Krikorian with the news in English. The presidency of the Syrian Arab Republic expressed thanks for the Syrians abroad for their wide participation in the presidential elections. On its Facebook page, the presidency stressed that the high turnout of Syrian people living abroad in the presidential election indicates the high awareness Syrian people enjoy, their allegiance to their homeland, and they're looking forward to build a bright future for their country. Presidential candidate Maher Abdul Hafid Hajjar affirmed that the image offered by the Syrians during the presidential elections abroad constitutes a turning point in the history of Syria and evidence on Syrian people's unity and commitment to their principles. Hajjar said that his elections program depends on reformulating the Arab liberation movement and achieving social justice. He expressed rejection for founding parties according to religious basis.
على الهامش في هذه المسألة تاريخيا سوريا تمتلك.
Presidential candidate Dr. Hassan al-Nouri said that the presidential elections aren't a dispute over post. Rather, they are about to choice to build a homeland that encompasses everyone. Meeting the coalition of the National Democratic Bloc forces at the Sheraton Hotel in Damascus, al-Nouri described himself as a man of reform and a competitor, not an opponent. The candidate said that his program has a strategic economic vision and involves administrative development and creating a social fabric through democratic elections where winning and losing both are acceptable possibilities. Information Minister Omran al-Zobi asserted that the upcoming presidential elections herald the end of a crisis in Syria, while forces in the U.S., Europe and the Gulf who support terrorism work to prolong the crisis. The minister told Al-Manar TV that the elections are carried out according to the constitution and law, and that the greater majority of Syrians inside the country are in areas under the control of the Syrian state and army, and these people will take part in the elections. He said that the number of Syrians abroad who participated in presidential elections were good, and that the statements made by some Lebanese forces in response to the great turnout by Syrian voters reflect these forces' political neurosis, asserting that doors are open for all Syrians to return to their country and the government is prepared to receive and accommodate them. Representatives of the Russian Central Elections Commission, CEC, will be sent as observers to Syrian presidential elections, which are due on June the 3rd. Ittar Stas Quarter, the CEC press service, as reporting that CEC member Anton Lopatin and deputy head of the Foreign Relations Department of the CEC staff Igor Yevlanov will monitor the presidential elections at Syria's invitation. Speaker of the People's Assembly Muhammad Jihad al-Laham on May 5th sent separate letters to parliament speakers and lawmakers of a number of friendly countries, inviting them to dispatch parliamentarians and election experts to monitor the upcoming presidential elections in Syria. Advisor to leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, Ali Akbar Wilayati, said that the forthcoming presidential elections in Syria will be a firm response to its enemies. Wilayati stressed that only the Syrian people can decide the future of their country and solve the crisis through democratic means. In a statement to the Iranian news agency IRNA, he affirmed that Syria is being exposed to attacks and conspiracy supported by Western countries and Arab reactionary forces in the region, pointing out that the Syrian government is able to restore security and stability to the country to some extent, despite all the financial and military support offered to the armed terrorist groups. Wilayati said that Western countries do not seek to establish democracy in the Middle East, but they want to have a client government in the region to protect the Zionist entity, so they reject the presidential elections in Syria. Russian Foreign Ministry stressed that the U.S. weapon supplies to the armed terrorist groups in Syria will escalate the situation in it and rebound fire to the countries supporting these groups. In a statement, the ministry said Russia is seriously concerned over media reports saying the U.S. administration is intending to boost weapon supplies to moderate gunmen on the Syrian armed opposition in Syria. The statement added that many media reports and publications confirm that Washington offered lethal military aid to the armed terrorist groups in Syria through the U.S. has mentioned only non-lethal aid, which constitutes an escalation of the crisis in Syria. In Daraa, Syrian Arab Army units controlled in a qualitative operation the two villages of Atuf and Satah Zahnan in Al-Lajat area after eliminating several terrorists and destroying their vehicles and ammunition. Syrian Arab Army units also foiled an infiltration attempt made by terrorists against one of the Syrian Arab Army checkpoints in Mazra'at Hammadi in al-Awsaj village, killing many of them. In Homs, a Syrian Arab Army unit seized various kinds of weapons in the old neighborhoods of the city. The seized weapons included snipers, RPG, Israeli-made machine guns, and several documents affiliated to Al-Nusra Front and other terrorist groups. The U.S. New York Times newspaper said that the foreign terrorists who traveled to Syria to fight along with the terrorist groups constitute grave danger to the West. The Daily added that more than 70 U.S. citizens headed to Syria to fight along with the terrorist groups in Syria, pointing out that one of them carried out a suicide bombing last week. The paper said that the total number of terrorists fighting along with the terrorist groups in Syria amounted to 11,000. The American newspaper Washington Post published an article that sheds the light on the Syrian huge crowds who gathered in front of the Syrian embassy in Beirut ballots in the Syrian presidential elections. The article clarified that while the temptations rise in the West to mess up the Syrian elections, however, the scene at the Syrian embassy front door in Beirut considered to be a reminder to the West that most Syrians consider the elections a pivotal event in their lives. The paper goes on to say that the photo that has been taken near the Syrian embassy in Al Yarzi showed the huge gatherings in the street who were trying desperately to reach the embassy to vote in the Syrian elections, a matter that emphasizes the power of the Syrian state to its sons. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. For more details about Syria and the region and to view this bulletin again, you can always visit our website in English, syriaonline.sy. Now to latest business and market news with Nariman Qassam, but after a short break.